right, so I thought an easy place to start for today would be, because I've done so many space-themed renders, like that's kind of how I kicked off, or got more well-known in the community, was my 4-minute CG space music video. I thought it would be easy to return to that, and I've never actually done a tutorial on the space stuff that in-depth before, like start to finish. I've done some presentations that vaguely break things down, but it would be cool, especially now that you guys have just released this space colony, to do a more full-featured tutorial that shows start to finish how I would go about setting up a render like this. So I'll jump into these stills real quick. So I like things that are easy, and this is extremely easy to do, this displacement here, this moon surface. So I'll show you guys how I built this today. And then, so this is just adding in some additional displacement with displacement deformer that creates this big crater, and then you can see I've dialed in some lighting that I like the look of, and then here's just the entire kit bash sitting in that lighting. And this is kind of, let's see, so these were some earlier versions, and this is kind of where I ended up with these images that I created yesterday. So there's one.
JD Hilliard's got a cool thought. He says it would be nice to see what you do with the kits straight out of the box. Do you organize them a certain way? How do you organize your textures?
Well, you can kind of see, I can answer that for you right here. In this one, I just brought the entire damn kit in and just set it floating in space, and then grabbed pieces when I wanted them. So, yeah, rather than having to go and copy in each model to my scene, I like to just kind of set it in the scene somewhere and grab the pieces that I need when I need them, and then set this to be invisible to the renderer, but there in the viewport, so I can just grab the buildings when I want.
David, to JD's point, I think it'd be a really cool video to show like how right from the start, maybe even just a full look at how you can, maybe even it might even be a very basic or almost 101 kind of Kitbash 3D look, but how do you open the package in C4D and get the pieces
Absolutely.
to where you want? What kind of versatility do you have? What kind of modularity are there? How are you getting your textures set up and your lighting? Something very basic that could be a reference video for people who have never used a kit before and want to jump in, and you could show how easy it is.
Definitely, and I like to do that in all of my tutorials, actually, where I don't take anything for granted that people have, previous knowledge. So I would definitely start with, here's the kit, here's how you bring it in, and just not skip any steps. I don't like to do time lapses that leave people in the dust. I like for people to be able to follow along very clearly with what I'm doing.
Super cool. And thinking formatting wise, if we could take that first 10 minutes or whatever of the tutorial and make that its own video as well, so that if people just wanted
you could release a quick tip. Here's how to get up and running in lightning speed with Kitbash.
Yeah,
something like that.
Super
cool. It's a good idea for sure.
Thank you for that, JD. We got a lot of comments coming in. Raja says, thanks so much for sharing your Octane knowledge. Learned a lot from YouTube videos. Awesome.
Cool.
And Poonsalong says, this brainstorm is a brilliant idea. David's tutorial really pushed the Octane community up a huge level, especially on the God Ray side.
Nice.
For those using C4D and Octane, here's that tutorial. Awesome. Thanks, Gabriel. Droki says, did you cover the lunar surface itself?
Not yet, but I will.
And then JD says, are you using FBX files?
I am, though I'm not sure. I feel like FBX, maybe it's easier. Sometimes they bring in the textures as well, but I don't really have an opinion of FBX versus OBJ. Like, I know OBJ is like a slightly older format, so typically I reach for FBX, but if anybody has any answers to that effect, let me know, because I don't have a big preference.
Awesome. And Gabriel has put in the part 2 of the God Rays as well. And then Mabel's got an awesome idea saying that Gabriel should do some tutorials too.
He definitely should, yeah. This stuff is amazing.
I think that's a fantastic idea. And Raja says, is the stream going to be available on YouTube later? Yes, our streams do kick out about 2 weeks later onto YouTube, and you can see all that on our Kitbash YouTube channel. And then to reiterate what we're doing here right now is we're brainstorming for tutorials that David is going to make later. So we're, as he said, we're gonna mess around here and take a look and pull ideas, and us as a community figure out what we think would be the coolest types of tutorials for David to bring to the world.
Definitely. And then Jay Dillard said, what scale are you using in your scene or for your objects? So this is another funny thing, because I suck at like looking at what the units are and the scale and caring about any of that, because in general, whatever scale it is, you can scale the textures and the lighting and all of the different pieces to make it work for that scale. So typically I just leave whatever the model or whatever the modeler was working with, like in this case, I just leave it at the default scale. I'll bring in the kit bash pack and then just start building, because I haven't found a compelling enough reason to start caring a ton about what scale I'm working at, because you can make scale convincing. It's all relative. You can make it convincing no matter what, basically. And maybe that'll create unrealistic depth of field values that don't match real life camera settings, but that doesn't matter, because I'm just using my eye to judge and create convincing scale. I'm using lighting to create scale and yeah, depth of field and stuff like that. Did that make sense?
Yeah, that cool. Did for me. I think we saw a lot of that in the contest today.
Exactly. Yeah. So here's another still. These are just some renders I made, the other day where I took it. And honestly, I'm not completely happy with this yet. I think if I wanted to take this even further, I would add a bunch of little lights to these buildings, and that would sell the scale even better, because then we would get more of a reference for what a window looks like. And when we see windows in buildings, then we can kind of approximate the scale. Or you can put in the little people's people or like a moon rover or something to get a better idea of what human scale is. And I think that would help. But at the very least with this, I'm happy with the lighting, and I'm happy with the environment so far. And the arrangement of the buildings was another challenge. So I'll go into that right here. So here's a couple more little solar panel things. So this was where I started out, and this was looking bad in terms of the arrangement of the buildings. I'm not that great yet at like I'm pretty good at like creating a procedural environment and finding an interesting composition, but this was actually a bit of a challenge for me, creating an interesting composition with the buildings themselves and Legoing it together in an interesting way. So you can see here, it's pretty scattered. Like it feels not organized and not like how humans would build an environment, right? It doesn't feel like a city. It feels kind of cobbled together, and like the scientists that set this lunar camp down were not especially smart about doing so. I thought for a second, like if you can give yourself some rules for how things should go, that helps. Like for instance, okay, they probably wouldn't build things on this hill, so this was a stupid idea putting this here, this one too. So let's put them at least on the horizontal surfaces, right? And then beyond that, like when we see a city, even if it's a smaller encampment, we expect the most important things to be at the center, or maybe some larger scale things to be at the center. We're used to seeing a downtown element, right? So we're used to seeing clusters rather than this evenly spaced weirdness where it would be very difficult to travel from building to building because of distance. Humans would build in clusters and in kind of a grid. And then my other rule, I think, was, oh, let's put maybe the tanks towards the outside, or have a camp over here somewhere that's more for greenhouse stuff and farming with lower to the ground buildings. So you can see I did that more here, where here we've got solar panels and these flatter buildings. I don't think this is my final. Let me go one forward. Oh yeah, this is showing, so here, another thing I think that was blowing the scale was this displacement moon surface. Looked too, I don't know, it was making these buildings feel a little miniature for whatever reason. I think this is too deep. And in terms of the displacement. So I ended up but when I would take the displacement down, then I had the issue where the background looked too flat. You weren't seeing the differences in lighting and texture in that displacement. So I ended up splitting this foreground out and using an entirely different texture. So first I tried, okay, let's split it out and just take the displacement down, which I think helped. And then I went for an entirely different texture from realdisplacementtextures.com, which you can see here, which just looks a little more pebbly or like kind of helps the scale to some degree. I still think it might suffer a bit from looking like a miniature, but again, I think those lights would really help solve that. But then the background, we still have that same lunar displacement. We're still getting these big craters, which I really like. And I can also show, like, I don't know whether you guys want me to just do, because we don't have that much time, I don't think I can build this from scratch, but I can show some elements. There's a lot of different things I could show. I could show how to build an asteroid belt. I could show how to create a nebula. And the nebula is a bunch of VDBs from Mitch Meyer's pack, which are brought in and rendered separately and then baked out as a completely different render, and then brought back in onto flat cards, essentially, so that we're saving a lot of memory and not overblowing the VRAM on our scene. So that's one thing I could talk about. And then just also setting up, I think maybe the most helpful thing would be setting up this overall displacement, how I've got these micro displacements, but also these bigger like craters going on to create these interesting landforms. Cool?
Yeah, super cool. There've been a couple comments in here. Mabel says SSS material related,
cool.
Still life, microscopic thingy,
cool.
Space OFC, and oceans and stuff. Some cool ideas, some things to think about.
Cool.
Please keep throwing in your ideas. The idea here is this is not the finished tutorial day.
Right.
This is our opportunity to hear everyone and get everyone to contribute and crowdsource some creativity for how these tutorials that David's going to then go and make could be. So when you watch these things, you'll be like, oh, that was my idea.
Totally. Mabel 3D oceans and stuff, that's definitely on the list. If I go to let's look quickly here as well. This will be another good jumping off point. Let me just boot this back up and go to my Instagrizzle.
Instagrizzle. And by the way, if you're not following David on Instagram, do yourself a favor.
Let's see. So the Warzone stuff could be fun.
Yeah.
Though I think I want to work on that look a bit more before doing a tutorial on it, because I think it could be pushed even further. But I could show how I create these patchy textures. There's it's maybe difficult when texturing a whole city to get variation and not see tiling. So I've got some techniques for that. And then also volumetrics, this was a fun one.
I love
some camera movement here, a little kind of camera jitter. And yeah, this was a pretty easy scene to assemble. In general, it's a lot. It looks cool, but it's pretty lazy work. And then this was fun, where I took a little bit more time and care with how I was arranging the city. I mean, ultimately, like a lot of the time I like to just literally scatter a bunch of buildings on a plane and create some kind of procedural thing, but the look is not as designed. So with this one, I kind of challenged myself to actually hand place the buildings a bit, which I think gives a better look. And here, this is an ocean look. And with oceans, what matters more than the surface properties, it is actually what's underneath the ocean. Because when you've got subsurface scattering and you've got a terrain underneath that, you get variation in color, so that you get these kind of Caribbean looks where certain parts are much brighter than others, and it looks, shallower and deeper, like you'd expect. Yeah. And my reference for this obviously was kind of like Dubai, and someone nailed it there. Dubai 2049. Yeah, and then this too could be part of a tutorial showing how I did um, this one. So this is just a matched camera move where I took the same camera from one scene and plopped it into the other. And because the two are moving perfectly in sync, almost like a motion control camera, you can easily wipe between them and it feels pretty seamless and interesting. I think the difference in lighting isn't especially seamless, but the continuity of movement, I think, brings your eye from one scene to the next, even though they're very different scenes.
Mm-hmm.
And this one,
I think it's so
what's
cool.
that?
I just think it's so cool.
Thanks, man. Yeah. Yeah, so this one was much more designed, and then this scene here is literally just scatter with like two different buildings, and that's it. And they're all just jammed on top of each other. So this one is extremely easy to set up, so that could be fun to show. I think people in tutorials like to see how just how easy it is, to get started. And I like to give them a base, like we don't necessarily have to go and create a final render like with a story. It can just be like, here's a really cool lunar environment to start with. Here's how you go about creating a lunar environment, and then leave it up to everyone else to instill their own creativity on top of that and add their story.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a marketplace or an audience that really wants to see highly technical, detailed, super pro tips. But I think there's also a large audience that would be interested in seeing how to do things really fast. We had Hunt Daughtry on the show 3 or 4 weeks ago, and he's previs and was showing how you can make play blasts really quickly, and in just a few hours you can build out something, and how pieces like this can help you get further along way faster. And then
absolutely,
then you can spend more time in those.
Yeah, because the poly counts on a lot of these packs are very low, and they're really light and flexible. And yeah, even if you're doing like, those techniques are great, even if you're doing full renders and a finished piece, because when you output play blasts, you're getting a sense of the camera motion when you're doing animation, and you can bring those into the edit and really lock the edit down beforehand, which is essentially what previs is.
Yep.
All right, so do we have some more comments here?
Mabel brings up a great point. Says David or Otoy supporting you already, because they really should. It's a great idea.
They are, actually. I'm super lucky. So my this is a funny story. My buddy Glyn, he's this guy in England. He's kind of an instigator online, and there's an Octane Facebook group. And one day he decided, for whatever reason, that he wanted to, just like post in the forum this poll, just totally ridiculous. Like, how should David Ariew be compensated for his amazing tutorials? I don't know, like, what drove him to do this, but I think maybe wanted me to make more tutorials and free up my time more, and he's just a super nice dude. So that actually kind of blew up a little bit, and there were all these different options, like 100 1080 Ti's, trip to Europe, like lifetime Octane subscription. And it was just, I thought it was hilarious and stupid. But then it actually caught Jules's attention, and he messaged me personally and said, yeah, you should be compensated for your tutorials. Let's do this. So I've since met the guys at Otoy, and they're sponsoring me to make these tutorials, which is incredible. And yeah, I really enjoy teaching as well as making art. Like, I like that balance between teaching and client work, and they feed into each other. So I'm really enjoying where things are going.
That is such an awesome example of community, of teammates and other artists supporting one another, and speaking up and saying, hey, here's something awesome that I could see happening for someone else.
Exactly. I love that. And I love that about the community. We're all in it together, and we're all, elevating each other. And like, one of my personal favorite things to do is try to convince people that are stuck at a company to go freelance, because there are just so many companies that are taking advantage of their employees, like not letting them release their reels, like just these extremely obnoxious, ways to basically have ownership over these people and have them reliant on them, which is not great for anyone, and that kind of stuff just makes me angry. So I always push this one book by Joey Korenman, the Freelance Manifesto, because it's packed full of way better advice than I could give, and it's just the best Bible and guide on being a freelancer. So yeah, I personally love helping other people. I love connecting one-on-one on Facebook. So if you're on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, wherever, hit me up, and start talking to me. And I like solving people's problems. It's just very gratifying and fun.
So rad. Take David up on that. Hit him up on online and connect with him. And connect with each other and give your voice, lend your voice to helping other people grow theirs. And I know that the more you do that, the better your life becomes. So I think that's just such a terrific example of being part of something larger than yourself. And that
Totally.
other artist who saw the value you were bringing spoke up in a way that coming from him was totally different than had it come from you. And the fact that someone else said and shined a spotlight on you and said, "Hey, look at this. He needs, he deserves some support here and some attention for the great work that he's doing." And great things came out of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that about the community. It's amazing.
Yeah, be that for someone else as much as you can. I think it'll come back to you.
Totally. All right, so you guys let's just jump in and start making something. I don't know how much longer we want to go for, but I'm down to just roll and pick away at something. And sound good?
That sounds great to me. I think Droki goes, "It's super rad to hear, David. Love the attitude and the outcome. What goes around comes around in both directions."
That's awesome.
David,
absolutely, I totally agree with that.
While you jump in on this, would you excuse me for just 1 second? I'm just going to take care of one thing, and I'll be right back.
Cool, man. Go do it.
Thank you.
Alrighty, so what are we doing here? Let's just start with the moon surface, and I'll show you how easy that is to create. So I'm going to take all of this stuff and just group it together, call it AB3D, and then you'll see that I've got this issue here in my viewport where it's clipping. So Control V will get you to the project settings, and I can just set this to large or even huge, and that just changes the clipping so that I can back up further without losing my buildings. And I'm just going to drop down a plane and scale it way the hell up. So this is going to be our lunar surface here, and I'll hide the kit bash stuff for the time being. So we'll get to that in a bit. So I'll create a new material here. You can always go to Materials, Octane Diffuse Material, but I've got some handy buttons that make it a lot quicker. So I'll jump in and I'm going to bring in an image texture somewhere around here. And here's a quick little tip. If you didn't know, you can just take this node and drop it right onto the actual light, and it'll automatically connect. So that's something that I've started to do, which saves a little bit of time. It's all about shaving off those seconds. So I'm going to hit my little ellipsis dude here and navigate to my favorite textures folder. So let me show you, let's see. So if we open this, this is the moon tileable displacement map that I've partly created, but I just Googled like lunar surface. So let's do that real quick. Let's look at Google and type in moon surface. Maybe we'll type in displacement. There you go. So I can't remember which of these it is. It's somewhere, there it is. It's this guy here. Now there's an 8K version of this. So let's go to our settings, tools, and go to size and go to larger than some number of pixels, 20 megapixels. So there you go. There's an 8K. This is the one that I got. View image. So this is basically the magic behind the whole thing, but this is not tileable. So there are a million tutorials out there for making textures tileable. It's not hard. Just bring it into Photoshop or After Effects, use the offset filter, and paint away the seams. So you want to avoid this stuff down here where it's stretching, and keep the center goodness, which where we've got, circles that look like legit craters versus these stretched weird things here. So Banks, are you there?
I am back.
Cool. I was just showing, this is the 8K image that I Googled to be able to create that lunar displacement. So extremely easy. So, and then I made it tileable, and here's my tileable texture, which there's a bunch of tutorials out there for doing that kind of thing online. So I'm going to bring that in, and it's just going to be my diffuse map at first. Let's put that on the plane, and there you go. So now if we pipe this into the displacement as well, we'll start to see some awesome detail. So go to displacement, click add displacement, and then pipe this in here. And because we're working at an extremely large scale with these buildings, the person who modeled these, I think, was working at a pretty large scale. We're going to have to crank this a lot. So first, let's set it to 8K since we're using an 8K map.
Speaking of scale, David, I just want to throw in Droki's comment here. Droki is our 3D supervisor who has jumped on board.
Real world scale, cool.
Recently, yeah. So he says the last few kits and all kits in the future are being made and exported at real world. So you are free to change that, of course, but at first you should be getting things at a 1-to-1, which some software loves and certainly Maya hates.
Yeah. And then that really helps with me not having to think about what the scale is that I'm using. I'll just go with how it was modeled.
Yeah, so very soon in the future, all of the kits won't have that scale discrepancy.
Right.
Which has come from some great audience feedback. And please keep that kind of feedback coming to us. We are trying in every way possible to make the kits the most awesome thing on the planet. So any way we can do that, let us know.
Absolutely. All right, so maybe I'll go with a little more displacement here so you can see this is looking kind of cool, but I like to add in a sunlight so I can just check things out. So I hit my little sunlight button here, and I'll just spin this around until we get a more interesting look. Now, I did not end up lighting my scene with the sunlight because there's an issue where, like, sunlight is great for scenes that are meant to be on Earth because it treats, it has an atmosphere essentially, and the lower you bring the sun, the more orangey and blue your lighting gets. You can even see it here. You can see the sunlight, and then at another time of day, it mimics noon. So this lighting could work, but I prefer to use just area lights because they don't, in this case, like we're in space, there's no atmosphere, so that actually hinders us. And if we go beyond a certain part of the hemisphere, then things just go black entirely, which is not what we want. So, but for now, while we're building this, I think it's fine to just leave it like this. Cool. All right, so that's a good start. You can see how much amazing detail we're getting just from this single image, and that's why I love using Octane and its displacement because it's just crazy fast. But we want to add additional peaks and valleys to this. So we're basically wanting to add displacement on top of the displacement. So this is taking care of our micro detail and these the craters and all, and selling the lunar surface. But we also want to create mountains out of this. So in our plane, we can just add in a displacement deformer. So drop down here. If you hold down Shift, it'll become a child of your object. So there's our displacer. And then under shading, we want to just add, a noise. And again, we're going to have to crank let's start by cranking the strength, or no, the height. So let's just make this really intense. And also, we need way more segments because that looks terrible. So let's pipe in like 200 segments by 200 segments. You can see now we've got this jaggedy mess. So let's go to our displacer, and that just means the noise is very small scale. So we have to scale that up a ton as well because again, we're working in a very large scene scale. So let's just add some ones. I tend to add ones and not, or I like repeat the same number because it's easier to type. But there we go. So now we're getting some kind of bumpiness, and let's take this to maybe 3 or 2. And just get a few valleys. Now we're starting to see this come apart at the seams, which could be solved. I don't remember. It might be solved by the fog tag. Sometimes if you take the fog tag up to 91, and you get a better result, but that's not solving it in this instance. But I think the displacement height is just too great anyway. And another thing you can do, though, if you say you really want these to be like very large like this, you want these large mountains, but you don't want to see this tearing, what you can do is you can add a smoothing deformer. So there's this deformer here called smoothing, so I'll just hold down shift as well. Actually, no, I want it in the same level of hierarchy, not as a child. And you can see what that's doing. If we maybe take this up to 300%, no, it won't do that. Let's do more iterations. There you go. As we do more iterations, it starts to bring things back together. So that's just another way you can approach that. But in general, I think we want to just make this a little bit less strong. So let's take this height down to half of what it was. And I'm still seeing those pesky little lines there. So let's try a different mode of displacement. There's this interesting thing that's been added into Octane called, so instead of follow geometric normal, you can follow the smooth normal. And look, that fixed it. Hooray. So that's awesome. So yeah, that's how I've been getting the peaks and valleys essentially. But say we wanted to then add in that giant crater that you saw in my renders. So let's up this again. Let's bring this back to a higher value since we've solved that first problem for ourselves. Cool. And then maybe we change the type of noise. This is where you can have fun and play, because the standard noise is just going to give you these basic looking hills. But then there's some other noises that we can layer in there. We can actually go in here and create something called a layer shader, which I only realized works well with Octane relatively recently, because it's more of a default C4D thing. But if you pop in that layer shader like I did, I went to layer here, and you can come in here, you can add in additional noises or even image textures. So we could blend in some other displacement maps here with the basic procedural noise. So I'm just going to go to shader and go to noise again. So we have something totally different. Actually, to save time and having to scale that up, what I can just do is I can copy shader and then paste shader, and it'll just appear. So we've got just a copy. So we're saving our noise patterns, and also we can blend between them. I can set them to different blend modes like normal or multiply, overlay, etc. And I can also blend back the opacity. So you can get pretty creative in here. But rather than the default noise texture here, let's try, I think I was having good results with Hamma, maybe. Yeah, though this we want to scale up some more, obviously, because we're getting some intense small detail peaks, which is not what we want. So let's try, yeah, that actually works pretty well. Where'd it go, though? Let's try this. There we go. So you can see that's a pretty different look, right?
Yeah, totally.
And it's giving us more ridges. And yeah, and if we crunch it too hard, say, let's see, there's low clip to play with or high clip. So that's making it even more extreme, but we're not seeing tearing yet. But if we do start to, now this is looking a little bit janky, right? Mm-hmm. Then we can add more segments is another thing we could do. So let's up this to 500 by 500, and that might smooth it out a bit. Let's just take it up to the max, 1000 by 1000. And if you don't, if this is not enough, well, actually that's working against us in this case. So let's just undo until we're back to 200 by 200. I think the smoothing deformer is the way to go. But what I was going to say is that you can always make the plane editable and then subdivide further with US, which will get you just more polygons. But in this case, we're seeing some weird patterns. So I think the smoothing deformer is the way to go to smooth that back out, though there's too many iterations. If you right click on any of these arrows, it'll reset to default. So remember, we had the iterations cranked to 120, which is not what I wanted. So I can right click there and it'll go back to the default of 10. And that's just, it's not as drastic, which is what I want. And that's just solving those issues that we were seeing. So do we have any new, I turned on the announcer voice setting. What is this? Oh, my voice is thicker all of a sudden. Yeah, I don't know. I'm still recovering from a cold. I went to NAB for a week, and it was hella fun. But it was also like, we call it the Maxon fever because we religiously come home sick because we've been breathing nasty cigarette smoke for a week and staying up till 4 a.m. every night and that kind of stuff. And Vegas is just disgusting.
Did you present with Max on there?
No, I've presented at NAB and SIGGRAPH, both. But I think they've had me on the SIGGRAPH circuit, so this one was just a really great opportunity to go and hang out with my friends and connect with other artists. And I did about 5 interviews that you can check out on brograph.com or on the Brograph YouTube with different presenters and people that I super respect. That was really fun.
Awesome. Yeah, we got EJ did some Max on stuff, didn't
he? EJ, yep, he did. EJ is like their golden boy. He presents every single time. Yeah. He is the greatest gateway drug into Cinema 4D because he makes it so easy and just, has a very clean like look that's almost vector based. Like it works really well for people coming from 2D flat animation to then make the jump to 3D. So he's like the perfect bridge because that's his style.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because he and I have such opposite styles. Mine is like this, I want it to be hyper real and like a movie, and his is like, I want it to be cartoony and fun and cute.
Yeah.
So it's a good pairing on his channel.
Yeah. Super cool.
All right, so
yep.
Yeah, I think let's make this. I like to jump around. I like get very ADD and distracted. So I'm like, you know what? Let's make this look more like space. So let's bring in a space image, for the background. And I like to use an HDRI so that I can basically look anywhere and not have to worry about where the camera's pointing, and just know that I'm covered from my space. So let me also. I'm having that view clipping again. So I'm going to hit Control D and set this to huge, so that I get that back in the viewport. And now I'm going to drop in an HDRI environment. And here I'll navigate into my image texture, because if you click on this one, it's going to load a default C4D bitmap node, which is not as flexible as the Octane image texture. So you want to jump into the image texture and then load it in. Now, here I've got another seamless texture. And again, I'll show you guys where I got this. This is just my one-click solution to making stars and space backgrounds. So somewhere around here is Star Map Blue. There's Star Map Blue Seamless. So let me open this so you guys can check it out. And that's all that is. Now, if you search for Nebula, or no, not Nebula, Star Map in Google, or maybe it's Milky Way. Let's just try Milky Way. It's this one here. But again, this is very low resolution, so you want to do that same thing with your tools, size, larger than, let's go larger than 20 megapixels, because I know that there's one that's like, this one here is 10K. So view image, and this is going to take a second to load. I feel like there was one that was 16K actually that I found. Let's see. This might work, though I'm not liking that there's some light bleed on the side there. So that's not the one I found. Let me see. Here it is. So it's dark, right? This is hard to see, but so just type in Star Map, and then here's a 16K, and let's go view image. Oh, by the way, Google obnoxiously took, you guys probably already know this, but you can't look at the view image anymore. They took that functionality out. So there's a Chrome extension that allows you to actually view the image. Yeah, it's really annoying. But you can see here, it's very dark, but this is the star map that I use. And if I were to just take this straight in, we would have the same distortion issues. Up in the top, there's some stretching. So I would eliminate that and make it seamless in that same, way that is on a bunch of other tutorials out there. So cool. Let's just bring this in. And then it's not going to show up until I untick. I could turn off my daylight is one way I could see it. So there you go. Now we've got stars everywhere. You can look any which way, and we just see massive star maps. But I don't like the cyan thing going on right now. And also, I want to combine it with my daylight for the time being. Like, this is not, again, it's not going to be my final lighting solution, but let's go into our daylight here and hit mix sky texture so that we can see both at the same time. And in our Octane sky here, if I want to get rid of this cyan cast that I put on it before, like in some cases that helps me, but right now it doesn't, then I can go to, right here, I can go to C40 Octane, color correction, jump into the color correction node and just bring the saturation down. I can also shift the hue so it's a bit more blue. So let's bring this back so we can just check on that we're making it more of a true blue. And then let's bring the saturation back down. So I think that's what I did on my previous renders there. And also, I'm not loving the scale. I think that it's, and the contrast. So there's a couple things we can do to alter that, but let's change the gamma a bit. So that helps already. And then if we jump in here, we can hit UV transform and just scale it down. And now it's looking a lot more subtle, and I think it helps the scale when you see smaller stars. When you see it like the bigger you make it, just the uglier things are going to start to look. So we really want that fine detail like this. And because it's seamless, I can rotate anywhere, and it's just good to go. So if you look down, sometimes you'll get that weird, no, I think we're good. Anyway, but you can see it repeating, like there, you'll see that weird, you'll see the Milky Way band there and up there. So the more you scale it down, the more you'll see those repetitions, you know? So gotta be a little careful with that. On my original space music video, I kind of designed that differently for each shot depending on what we were looking at. And depending on, like, certain shots, I was looking to the astronaut's helmet, and it had to be scaled pretty large because otherwise I saw those repetitions in the reflection of his helmet. So you have to be just comfortable with altering things to design for the shot, basically. Cool. All right, so say I want like a big old crater in here. And let's make this plane bigger as well. Oh, that's fun. So, yeah, I'll make it bigger, but this is also too high frequency, and let's just bring down the amount of displacement. Let's just take the strength down, something like that. And again, we could go and blend back with, with the noise too, our original noise. So our original noise looked like this, and our new one looks like this, which is a bit tighter and with more peaks and valleys. And also the octaves are another good control. Like if I wanted to get a bit more spiky, I think I can up the octaves a bit. But yeah, there's a million different noise settings in here that you can play with to try and get the look that you're after. So I'll blend this back a bit, maybe something a bit more subtle like that, because now that you've got some kind of procedural base to start with, you can then go in and add in additional displacers that are targeted to design different hills and mountains and craters. So if I duplicate this displacer, you can see that it's pinching things a bit more, but what we want to do is go to the fall off and change it to, let's do a spherical fall off. And now the sphere is very, very small. So we want to scale this way, way up. Blah. And now we want to take the amount of displacement down. Let's take this height way down. Keep going. Because this has a very different sensitivity once you make it a spherical fall off. But you can see now, wherever I move this sphere, it'll affect the terrain. And maybe I don't want it to be the same noise because it's pinching things a bit too much. So we can simplify the noise or scale it up a ton. So let's go back in here, and we don't need this one, this hammer noise, because it's pinching things. And this one can be much larger, so that, like, let's make it super large. So it either just depresses this whole thing, or kind of bubbles it up. The other thing you can do is, rather than using a noise, is you could just use a single flat texture. So I could go, not image, but shader, color, and now we should be seeing, especially if we put this in the stack before, I think, and then take down the height, you get some pretty wacky stuff happening. You could go negative strength. So intensity centered just means that it will both displace upwards and downwards. Now intensity just means it's always going to displace, if you've got the strength above 0, it'll always displace upwards, whereas intensity centered could do both. Though I think you're only going to see that if you've got the noise on there, because the noise has both dark and light values. Whereas right now we're just using a flat color, which is white, so that's just going to push it upwards. So it doesn't really matter what we pick right now. But anyway, if I bring it down, you can see that we start to get this more of a crater. This is not what I did last time, but it's working okay, so I'm just going to roll with it. And then you can create additional, so if I just duplicate this out and then bring it upwards, now I can create a mountain, but with less grossness. Let's try that. And then bump to strength. Nope. See, now it's like, it's kind of like chewing into itself. So let's go back on this one for the mountains. Let's go back to our original displacer, duplicate that. And then again, we want this to be fall off, spherical. And we want to, again, scale the sphere way up. And then go back to our shading, and I'm going to get rid of this noise again, and then increase the size of this texture, and also bring the displacement amount way down. And go to rather intensity centered, intensity. And then again, it's really subtle that you gotta It's getting closer. So I'm not loving how it's pinching in on itself, but this is one of those things where I'm like, you get the idea. I'll do it better in the full tutorial.
Yeah, but this is super cool to see. A question from Mabel: did you ever use World Machine to make landscapes?
Yes, absolutely. World Machine is very cool, though I feel like it's outside the scope of this tutorial. And also, the thing about World Machine is it creates very detailed displacement maps that are great in and of themselves, but I don't think it would work well to create that and then add this moon surface on top. The reason I like this technique is because it allows me to have these very general, blobby, large displacement surfaces, and then mix that with the micro displacement of the moon's surface, which when I crank the moon's displacement even more, you get all of this very interesting detail. Say I brought that up even more, that's what's doing most of the work, but then you want these general forms to be, a little bit looser and not as defined. So, yeah.
Gabriel answered the question too. He said, World Machine is really great at landscapes, but David's workflow here really provides this instantaneous feedback in procedural.
Yeah, exactly. And also it just lets you, it lets you art direct like right in front of you versus having to jump between programs. You can design mountains how you want and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So cool. That's the general idea behind this. Now we should maybe move on to, do we want to do lighting? There's so many different things we can cover. Lighting, asteroid belts, the nebula. I can also jump into my finished scene and we can start breaking that down. what do you guys want to do next?
You know what I think, David, is we may want to, we're coming right to that 2-hour mark here, and maybe what we do is we take the feedback that we've gotten from this,
collect it.
Yep, and then and do this again.
Absolutely. Yeah, I just jumped right into tutorial mode, but this could go for another like 2 or 3 hours if I let myself, you know.
I love it, man, and I think this is awesome. I think this is going to be so great. So anyone out there, if you have some last little thoughts you want us to chew on while we're figuring out what to do with this next tutorial, throw them in the chat. Let us know what you want to see, and contribute your ideas to this thing. But some great ideas so far, and I think this is just going to be an awesome tutorial that we'll get to collaborate on and make together here, David.
Awesome, man. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Well, dude, thank you immensely.
Hold on 1 sec. Jay Dillard said, "Wait, so let's see. So
do you get the objects on the bubbly texture plane?"
Yeah, I just literally take the Kit Bash models and jam them into the bumpy texture plane. Yeah. Is that what he's asking?
I believe so. JD, did that get it for you? And then David asks, Droki asked David if you port your workflow over to Max, so then you can copy them. That'd be great. Porting your workflow over to Max. Yeah.
Right.
That might be the next step.
Never used Max, and I don't intend to. Nothing against Max. It's like it's just such a jump to go from your major 3D package to another, unless you're very compelled to do that, because it's like it's your base language that you're speaking. It's like going from natively speaking English to French or something.
Right.
Yeah. Nothing against Max. It's like obviously an incredible program, and Droki, you're doing such amazing work there. Yeah,
Droki, we'll have to get you to show your workflow in Max. I know you're doing it on
exactly.
your channel. Be sure you all check out Droki's channel.
Totally.
And JD just elaborates, by eye, or do you use the snap tool to bring objects?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. That was one of my frustrations with making this image, is like I was looking for a good way to have the buildings follow the landscape. It would be very nice if I could just drag them around and they would conform to the landscape, and I'm sure there's a way to do that. But I ended up just hand placing them. But yeah, it would be much more convenient. There is a polygon snap tool, and I think that could work. I'm not sure that you can drag the model over the surface, though, and get it to follow. There are ways to, I was looking up tutorials, and there are ways to kind of project splines onto a landscape and get it to follow the surface, and then have your model follow that spline. But that's not really useful other than through animation. You would want to be able to move that object over the surface to be able to art direct where you're placing it. But I ended up just doing it by hand because it didn't take that much longer. I could have spent a lot of time trying to solve the problem in the most efficient way, but ultimately, a lot of the times you just gotta hack things and brute force it.
Awesome. Well, so cool to have you on the show here with us, and I'm so excited about this tutorial. And I thank you everyone for putting your feedback in here and participating with us. And Momo Goods is in the room. What up, Mo?
What's up, dude?
Good to see you, man. And JD says, now you have to try and use the instances or just duplicating up.
Right. So because in the case of, or in this thing that I made, I didn't use instances because I didn't have that many duplicate objects. If I had a bunch of duplicate objects, I would do instances if I were running into VRAM limits, but I don't often hit the VRAM limits with my 1080 Ti's. So it's best practice to use instances when you're duplicating things because it saves on VRAM, but typically I'm lazy and I don't bother. If I want like a whole field of buildings or something like that, then I'll use Octane Scatter, which is basically like instances, and with that you can get millions of instances without bogging down your VRAM, and that's what I did with the asteroid belt back there. It's got like millions of small asteroids, and then hundreds of thousands of medium asteroids, and then hundreds of large asteroids. So you get that variation in scale. Yeah.
Super cool. And Mabel says, and get yourself a Twitch channel, baby.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, right
I
on.
like piggybacking on other people's channels though. It's more fun.
You're more than welcome here anytime you want.
Sweet.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Much more to come with us and David. And I want to plug one thing. Right now we are having a sale. Buy one, get one half off. So if you're looking to pick up, if you've been eyeing 2 kits in the store, this is a real good time to snag them. That is all I've got. Anything else from you, sir?
I think that's good. Thanks for having me on, man. And yeah, thanks to everybody in the chat. This was really fun and super chill. And yeah, I'm looking forward to making this tutorial for sure, and many more tutorials. Because tutorial is gonna be like, it'll be like, oh, here's how to make the kit bash on the moon. But how about here's how to make a war zone or this or that. Like, there's so many different ideas, and I think this plugs in perfectly to my workflow with Octane and with EJ's channel and all that stuff. So it's going to be a great collab.
Yeah, we could not be more excited about this.
Same here, dude.
This is awesome.
Sweet.
Well, everyone, and Jokey goes, last idea for future, Octane atmosphere.
Octane atmosphere, of course, but not in space. There's no atmosphere in space, bro.
There's no atmosphere in space.
Though we could do a Mars, like that. The concept image I found very interesting because there was some thin atmosphere, which was super cool.
Yeah, it's when terraforming comes along.
Yeah, exactly.
Max Berman in the house says, "You rock, David."
No, you rock.
JD throwing the Discord channel link. In between now and next week, jump on the Discord, join us up. Jean-Marc says, thanks, David, and congrats to Lav. Thank you for tuning in with us. Thank you for everyone who competed in the KB3D contest. And check us out soon. Come back and hang with us. Y'all.
Awesome.
See you guys.
See you guys.